America believed something for decades, that bigger cars saved lives. More steel, more weight, more confidence. These trucks looked unstoppable, built for work, built to survive anything. But crashes don't care about size, they care about physics. Before airbags, before crash tests, before safety laws, these machines were sold as strong, not safe. In a crash, the truck often survived. The people inside didn't. This video is not about blaming drivers, and it's not about hating classic trucks. It's about understanding a dangerous myth that millions of Americans trusted. If you care about real car history, not marketing stories, subscribe. Because big cars didn't save lives, they just made us feel safe.
Number 5. Chevrolet Apache 1958 was a big, honest work truck. It was designed to haul loads, survive rough roads, and work long days without complaint. In the late 1950s, trucks like this were everywhere in America, on farms, construction sites, and highways. People trusted them because they looked strong. Thick steel, a body-on-frame design, and a tall driving position created a feeling of control and protection. But safety, as we understand it today, was not part of the design brief. In 1958, there were no modern crash safety standards in the United States. There were no federally mandated crash tests, no airbags, no engineered crumple zones. The Chevrolet Apache was built on a rigid ladder frame, which was excellent for carrying weight, but extremely unforgiving in a collision. When a crash happened, the structure did not absorb energy, it transferred it. Inside the cab, the priorities were durability and simplicity, not occupant protection. The dashboard was metal. The steering column was rigid and non-collapsible. In a frontal impact, it did not move away from the driver, it moved toward them. Seatbelts were not standard equipment. In many trucks, they were not installed at all, and even when available, many drivers did not use them because safety culture barely existed. The size of the Apache created a powerful illusion. The truck sat high, with a long hood and a heavy front end. Drivers felt protected simply because they were bigger than most cars on the road. But physics does not reward size alone. A heavier vehicle carries more kinetic energy. Without controlled deformation, that energy has only one place to go: into the cabin and the human body.
Another critical factor was braking and handling. The Chevrolet Apache used drum brakes, which were far less effective than modern systems, especially under load. Steering systems lacked modern precision, and suspension tuning prioritized payload over stability. In emergency situations, stopping distances were long, and avoiding obstacles was difficult. The truck was strong, but not agile, and not forgiving when mistakes happened. None of this means the Chevrolet Apache was poorly built. It was built exactly as intended for its time. The problem was not negligence, it was limited knowledge. Engineers did not yet fully understand crash dynamics, and manufacturers were not required to design for occupant survival. Marketing emphasized toughness, reliability, and power, not what happened to the human body in a collision. This is why the Chevrolet Apache represents the core idea behind this series. Big vehicles did not save lives by default. They made people feel safe. That feeling came from steel, height, and weight, not from real protection. In many crashes, the truck survived with minimal damage. The people inside often did not. By modern standards, a 1958 Chevrolet Apache would fail immediately, not because it is a bad truck, but because safety had not caught up with strength. It stands as a reminder of a time when American vehicles were built to endure work, not impact, and when confidence came from size rather than science.
Number 4. Jeep Gladiator 1968 was not built to feel comfortable or reassuring. It was built to go where roads ended. Introduced as a full-size pickup based on Jeep's Wagoneer platform, the Gladiator carried a reputation for toughness, off-road capability, and mechanical simplicity. It looked utilitarian, almost military, and that image alone made many people assume it was safe. But safety and toughness were not the same thing in the late 1960s. The Gladiator used a body-on-frame construction with solid axles front and rear. This made it extremely durable on rough terrain and under heavy use, but it also meant the structure was rigid. In a collision, there were no engineered crumple zones designed to absorb impact energy. The frame stayed intact, and the force of the crash traveled directly into the cabin. Inside, the priorities were function and durability. The dashboard was metal. Padding was minimal or non-existent. The steering column was fixed and non-collapsible. In a frontal impact, it did not telescope away from the driver as modern columns do. It remained rigid, increasing the risk of severe chest and head injuries. Seatbelts were becoming more common by the late 1960s, but they were still not universally standard, and usage was inconsistent. Airbags were not even part of the conversation yet. The Gladiator's height created another powerful illusion of safety. Sitting higher than most passenger cars, drivers felt they had better visibility and more control, but that height came with trade-offs. The center of gravity was higher, increasing the risk of rollovers, especially during sudden maneuvers or off-road driving. Suspension systems were tuned for strength, not stability. On pavement, especially at highway speeds, the truck was far less forgiving than it appeared. Braking technology was also limited. Like most trucks of the era, the Gladiator relied on drum brakes. Under load or repeated braking, performance degraded quickly. Stopping distances were long by modern standards, and emergency braking required far more anticipation and skill from the driver. Steering systems lacked precision, and combined with narrow tires, the margin for error was small.
What makes the Jeep Gladiator important is not that it was unusually dangerous for its time. It was typical. It reflected how vehicles were engineered before safety became a regulated science. Manufacturers focused on durability, traction, and mechanical reliability. Crash survivability was not yet a design goal. There were no standardized crash tests forcing engineers to consider what happened to occupants during impact. Marketing reinforced the illusion. Jeep's image was built around strength, independence, and capability. The Gladiator looked like a vehicle that could protect you simply by being tough. In reality, toughness protected the machine, not the people inside it. In many serious crashes, the frame survived. The human body absorbed the consequences. By modern safety standards, a 1968 Jeep Gladiator would not pass, not because it was poorly engineered, but because safety knowledge and regulations had not caught up with vehicle size and power. It stands as a clear example of why big, capable vehicles did not automatically save lives. They made drivers feel confident, sometimes too confident, in machines that offered very little real protection.
Number 3. Chevrolet C/K Series, 1966, including the C10 and C20, represented one of the most important pickup platforms in American history. These trucks were everywhere. On farms, at job sites, on highways, and increasingly in everyday family use. By the mid-1960s, pickups were no longer just tools, they were becoming personal vehicles, and that shift made the illusion of safety even stronger. The 1966 CK used a traditional body-on-frame design with a rigid ladder frame. This construction was excellent for durability and payload capacity, but it offered little protection in a collision. There were no engineered crumple zones designed to manage impact energy. When a crash occurred, the frame resisted deformation and the force was transmitted directly to the cabin. Inside the truck, the focus was utility, not occupant protection. The dashboard was primarily metal with minimal padding. The steering column was fixed and non-collapsible. In a frontal impact, it remained rigid rather than collapsing away from the driver, increasing the risk of severe injury. Seatbelts were becoming more common by this time, but they were not yet standard equipment across all trims, and usage was far from universal. One of the defining characteristics of the CK was its size and stance. The elevated driving position created a strong sense of control and visibility. Many drivers felt safer simply because they sat higher than passenger cars, but this height came with trade-offs. The center of gravity was higher, and suspension systems were designed to carry weight, not to maximize stability during emergency maneuvers. Sudden swerves at speed could quickly overwhelm the truck's limits. Braking performance was another critical weakness by modern standards. The 1966 CK relied on drum brakes at all four corners. Under load, braking effectiveness decreased significantly. Heat buildup could lead to brake fade, increasing stopping distances and reducing control during repeated braking. Compared to modern disc brake systems, the margin for error was small. Steering and handling reflected the priorities of the era. Steering systems lacked the precision and feedback expected today. Tires were narrow, offering limited grip, especially on wet or uneven surfaces. Combined with the truck's mass, this made accident avoidance far more difficult than many drivers realized. What makes the Chevrolet CK particularly important in this discussion is how normal it felt. It was not marketed as extreme or dangerous. It was marketed as dependable, strong, versatile. These trucks were trusted by working families and professionals alike. That trust was based on reliability and toughness, not on any real understanding of crash safety. Crash testing, as we know it today, did not exist. There were no standardized federal tests evaluating occupant survival. Manufacturers were not required to design vehicles that protected people during collisions. As a result, safety was largely passive and assumed rather than engineered. In many serious accidents involving trucks like the CK, the vehicle itself remained largely intact. The frame survived, the body panels held their shape, but the energy of the crash had to go somewhere, and without controlled deformation, it went into the occupants. The truck's strength protected the machine, not the human body. By modern standards, a 1966 Chevrolet CK would fail immediately, not because it was poorly designed, but because it was designed for a different purpose and a different understanding of safety. It stands as a clear example of why size and strength alone never guaranteed protection.
Number 2. International Harvester Travelall 1965 was one of the earliest examples of what would later become the modern SUV. It was large, tall, heavy, and designed to carry both people and cargo over long distances. Built by a company known primarily for agricultural and industrial equipment, the Travelall carried an image of seriousness and strength. For many Americans, that alone translated into trust. The Travelall used a body-on-frame construction derived from light truck platforms. This made it extremely durable and capable of handling heavy loads, trailers, and rough terrain. But that same strength came with a critical limitation. The frame was rigid, with no engineered crumple zones. In a collision, the structure resisted deformation instead of absorbing energy. The force of impact traveled directly into the passenger compartment. Inside the cabin, design priorities reflected its truck origins. The dashboard was largely metal with minimal padding. Interior surfaces were hard, and there were few features intended to reduce injury in a crash. The steering column was fixed and non-collapsible. In a frontal impact, it did not collapse away from the driver. It stayed rigid, increasing the risk of serious chest and head injuries. Seatbelts were available by the mid-1960s, but they were not consistently standard across all configurations, and usage was still far from universal. One of the Travelall's defining features was its height and mass. It sat significantly higher than passenger cars of the era and weighed considerably more. This created a powerful sense of security. Drivers felt they were above danger, protected by sheer size. But physics does not reward height or weight on their own. A heavier vehicle carries more kinetic energy, and without controlled deformation, that energy must be absorbed by the occupants. The higher center of gravity introduced additional risks. Compared to sedans, the Travelall was more prone to body roll during sudden maneuvers. Suspension systems were designed to support weight, not to optimize handling at speed. In emergency situations, especially on paved roads, stability could be compromised far more quickly than drivers expected. Braking performance reflected the limitations of the era. Like most large trucks and utility vehicles of the time, the Travelall relied on drum brakes.
Under heavy loads or repeated braking, effectiveness declined. Stopping distances were long by modern standards, and maintaining control required anticipation and experience. Modern safety systems such as anti-lock braking, electronic stability control, and traction control did not exist. What makes the International Harvester Travelall especially important is its role in shaping consumer expectations. It was marketed as a versatile, family-capable vehicle that could also work hard. This blurred the line between passenger car and truck. Families began to use large utility vehicles not just for work or travel, but for everyday driving. The feeling of safety came from size and reputation, not from engineered protection. At the time, there were no standardized federal crash tests evaluating occupant survival. Safety regulations were minimal, and manufacturers were not required to demonstrate how vehicles protected people in collisions. Engineers focused on reliability, payload capacity, and durability. Crash survivability was largely assumed rather than tested. In many serious accidents involving vehicles like the Travelall, the structure remained intact. The body-on-frame construction did what it was designed to do, it stayed strong. But strength alone does not reduce injury. Without crumple zones, collapsible steering columns, or energy-absorbing interiors, the human body became the weakest component in the system. By modern standards, a 1965 International Harvester Travelall would fail immediately. Not because it was badly built, but because it was built before safety became a science. It represents a time when Americans believed that bigger, heavier vehicles offered protection simply by existing.
Number 1. GMC Suburban Carryall 1950 was one of the earliest full-size utility vehicles sold to the American public. Long before the term SUV existed, this vehicle defined the idea of carrying people and cargo in one massive enclosed body. It was originally developed for military, government, and industrial use, and only later adopted for civilian life. That origin explains almost everything about how it was built and why it felt safe, but wasn't. The Suburban Carryall was based on a heavy-duty truck platform with a body-on-frame design. The frame was thick steel, designed to survive harsh conditions, poor roads, and heavy loads. Durability was the priority. Passenger safety was not yet a defined engineering goal. In 1950, vehicles were not designed around crash energy management. They were designed to stay intact. From the outside, the Suburban looked unstoppable. Its long wheelbase, tall stance, and sheer mass gave drivers a powerful sense of security. Sitting high above the road, surrounded by steel, many owners believed they were protected simply by size. But in a collision, mass alone does not equal protection. Without controlled deformation, that mass becomes a liability. The front end of the Suburban Carryall had no crumple zones. In a frontal crash, the rigid frame transferred impact forces directly into the cabin. There was nothing designed to absorb or redirect energy away from occupants. The vehicle resisted damage, but the human body absorbed the consequences. Inside, the cabin reflected its truck roots. The dashboard was metal with little to no padding. Interior edges were hard and unforgiving. Seatbelts were not standard equipment in 1950. Most occupants relied on the vehicle's size rather than restraint systems. In sudden deceleration, passengers were thrown forward with nothing to slow them down safely.
The steering column was fixed and rigid. In frontal impacts, it did not collapse or move away from the driver. This dramatically increased the risk of severe chest, neck, and head injuries. Modern collapsible steering columns, now taken for granted, would not appear for many years. The Suburban's suspension and handling were optimized for load capacity, not emergency maneuvers. It rode on leaf springs designed to carry weight, not to provide stability at speed. Body roll was significant, especially during sudden turns. Combined with a high center of gravity, this increased the risk of loss of control and rollover, particularly on paved roads where civilian drivers used it daily. Braking systems were another limitation. The vehicle relied on drum brakes, which were adequate for slow, predictable driving, but struggled under heavy loads or repeated use.
Stopping distances were long, and brake fade was a real issue. In emergency situations, the Suburban could not stop or respond as quickly as drivers expected. What makes the GMC Suburban Carryall especially important is its cultural impact. It helped normalize the idea that large utility vehicles were suitable for families. Churches, schools, contractors, and eventually households adopted it. The message was subtle but powerful. Bigger meant safer. That belief would shape American car culture for decades. At the time, there were no federal safety standards, no crash test ratings, and no requirement to measure occupant injury. Manufacturers were not misleading consumers by modern definitions. Safety simply wasn't measured the way it is today. The Suburban did exactly what it was built to do. It survived. But survival of the vehicle is not the same as survival of the people inside it. In many serious accidents, the Suburban's structure remained largely intact. The frame held, the body stayed together, and the occupants paid the price. By modern standards, a 1950 GMC Suburban Carryall would fail every major safety test, not because it was poorly engineered, but because it was engineered for a different world, a world where strength was confused with protection. The Suburban Carryall is an icon. It is a foundation of American automotive history, but it also represents the beginning of a dangerous assumption that big vehicles save lives. In reality, they only made Americans feel safe, long before safety was truly understood.